In any raid that's got a reasonable amount of difficulty, one of the things that either makes or breaks a boss encounter is good use of raid cooldowns. This could be defensive cooldowns, or as we move into Mist of Pandaria, it could even be offensive cooldowns. Now, while right now in Cataclysm, we technically have got an offensive buff, which you would class Bloodlust or Heroism as an offensive buff, because it's increasing the output of your DPS by giving everyone a crap ton of haste. Whilst that doesn't go anywhere in Mist of Pandaria, we do get additional raid cooldowns, which if you watched yesterday's video where I went over the changes to buffs and debuffs, then you'll know it's actually very easy to get every buff and debuff you need from maybe just 4 or 5 people, which means it then opens up the possibility, which everybody's going to take advantage of, is being able to class stack to get as many of the offensive raid buffs as possible. Now, the good thing is the offensive raid buffs generally come from people that can actually do extremely good damage anyway. You're kind of not missing out on anything. Let's get Bloodlust and Heroism out of the way first, because it's quite simple. You're going to get this from a Shaman with Heroism or Bloodlust, a Mage with Time Warp, or an exotic pet, which is a Corehound, which will be Ancient Hysteria for your Hunters. Now, nothing's changed here. You're going to get 30% melee range and spellcasting speed, and generally, you're going to get to use it once per fight. I say generally because if it's over 10 minutes, obviously, you will get a second use if you use your first use quite early on. But that's kind of a boring one. Instead, let's talk about the two big offensive cooldowns that people, especially in 25-man, are going to be stacking heavily. Firstly, and the most important one in my opinion, is definitely Skull Banner. Warriors get 3 types of banners. You're going to get Demoralizing Banner, which is for defensive purposes, Skull Banner, which is for offensive purposes, and finally Mocking Banner, which is an AoE taunt. Now, Skull Banner increases the critical strike damage by 20% for raid members within 40 yards of the banner, and this lasts 10 seconds. Now, 20% extra critical strike damage is obviously huge, and it lasts 10 seconds, and this can be brought by any warrior. It's not specifically a DPS warrior. Every warrior has access to all 3 banners. So for a second, let's pretend we've got 4 warriors. We've got, let's say, a prot warrior, which prot warriors are perfectly viable in MoP and actually do a lot of damage. And let's say you had a few DPS warriors, so you got 4 in total in a 25-man raid. You can now back-to-back drop your Skull Banners, so you get the full duration of Bloodlust with 20% additional damage as well. Now, if you add on top of this Stormlash Totem, which is another new offensive raid cooldown which Shamans are going to bring, Stormlash Totem causes spells and attacks to trigger bursts of additional nature damage, and this also lasts 10 seconds. So again, now if you've got 4 warriors and 4 Shamans, you can literally back-to-back Skull Banners and Stormlash for such huge amounts of damage during Bloodlust. Like, it's crazy. And I really do see lots of 25-man raid groups, especially in week 1, running several warriors and just organising Skull Banners back to back to back. And then again, you throw Stormlash on top of this, and it's just huge damage. And the good thing again is Shamans, it don't matter about what spec, you all bring it. So if you've got a couple of Resto Shamans, let's say 1 Enhancement and 1 Ellie, straight away, you've already got enough without overstacking on one specific role to be able to cover the full duration of Bloodlust. Now, both Stormlash Totem and Skull Banner are great additions, and it just means rather than only being able to manage defensive raid cooldowns on fights, you're now also arranging offensive cooldowns as well, which, in my opinion, is a good thing. When it comes to the raid defensive cooldowns, they've also got a lot more interesting, and some of the ones that really in Cataclysm should be a raid cooldown that's useful and everybody wants to use, they're kind of a little bit lackluster. Things like Smoke Bomb for a rogue. So let's start there. Smoke Bomb in Mist of Pandaria still has the unable to target in or out of the smoke cloud effect, so still really good in PvP, but it also now is just a flat 20% damage reduction for everybody stood in the Smoke Bomb. So it's an actual proper raid defensive cooldown now. Not really a lot else to say other than that's great news, because again, when we was looking at debuffs and buffs yesterday, you now know that, well, there's only a rogue and a warlock outside of course, a hunter's pet that can actually bring the spell damage taken on the target. So not only could you bring a rogue to get that debuff, you're also going to get a raid defensive cooldown as well, which is super cool. Devotion Aura for Paladins change as well in a really interesting way. Where at the moment Dev Aura for Paladins just basically doubles the effect of whatever aura you've got on, and ordinarily you'd use it with your Resistance Aura, so you just take less damage from spells, you'd normally use it when there's lots of fire damage going out or shadow damage or whatever. Well, now it's actually just a flat 20% magic damage taken reduced, and it also grants immunity to silence effects, which that is actually particularly useful on at least 1 or 2 fights that I can think of during MoP. Of course, the 20% magic damage reduction cooldown aspect of it is useful in loads and loads of fights, and it's a really good raid cooldown. For Death Knights, you can get Anti-Magic Zone, which is one of your level 30 talents, so you do have to choose it, but every spec of Death Knight has access to it. And what it does now is it lasts 3 seconds, so it's not a particularly long cooldown, but it lasts 3 seconds and reduces all magic damage taken while inside the Anti-Magic Zone by 40%. So that's an absolutely huge magic reduction cooldown, and it's ordinarily going to be used at one of those moments where a big burst of damage goes out, pretty much how you use it in Cataclysm now, to be fair. Power Word Barrier for Priests has changed ever so slightly. The main thing really is there's no glyph for it anymore, so you can't get that 10% extra healing while you're stood in it. Instead, now it's just the 25% damage reduction when you're inside the bubble, and also you can receive no pushback at all on your spells when you're casting in it as well. So that bit is particularly useful, to be fair, because ordinarily you'd all be stacked in the bubble while big AoE's going off, and now, yeah, you're not getting any pushback on abilities either. Spirit Link Totem for Shaman's not changed at all. It's still really, really powerful, and it's a Resto Shaman only ability. So it reduces damage taken by 10% and keeps redistributing everyone's health to keep everybody on the same-ish percentage. Still a super strong cooldown, definitely going to be something you're using. And the reason I say it's definitely going to be something you're using, because I've got to be honest with you, Resto Shaman's going to be the one healing class that you're going to have in pretty much every comp, because they're pretty overpowered. Warriors still get Rallying Cry, and nothing too interesting to talk about here at all. Still just temporarily grants everyone 20% maximum health, but they do also now get Demoralizing Banner. So Demoralizing Banner reduces damage dealt by 10% for all enemies within 30 yards of the banner. So it's not actually a 10% damage reduction on you as such. The banner needs to be near the thing that's hitting you, and then you're going to receive 10% less damage, because he's going to deal 10% less damage. Now, they're the main offensive raid cooldowns and sort of damage reduction cooldowns, but there are a couple of real honourable mentions as well that you're just going to absolutely have in some form of rotation when it comes to more difficult bosses. I suppose just before I mention them, there is still Mana Tide Totem for getting mana back, Hymn of Hope as well for getting mana back, and of course Innovate, even though things like Innovate have changed slightly, so it's now actually based off of the Casting Druid spirit, like Mana Tide Totem. But again, they're pretty boring, so let's move on. Now, all of these are actually like healing related, so, you know, you're a DPS, but you need to just quickly help your healers out by using quite a big cooldown. So firstly, for Shadow Priest, Vampiric Embrace has been completely redesigned, and it's on a 3-minute cooldown and lasts 15 seconds, but it fills you with the Embrace of Shadow energy, causing you and your allies to be healed for 50% of any single target shadow spell damage you deal, split evenly between them. Now, you can even glyph this so it does double that, but for slightly less duration, takes 5 seconds off, so it'll only be 10 seconds. But you can do some serious burst healing with this, plus, let's say, Halo, which is your level 90 talent, and in a pinch, you can literally not carry the healing, that might be a bit extreme, but you can put out a lot of healing. And the same goes with Shaman, and the reason why Shaman is particularly strong is because they get Healing Tide Totem in Mists of Pandaria. And Healing Tide Totem, not only does it do an absolute crap ton of healing, but it's not exclusively for Resto Shaman. So if you're an Ellie Shaman or an Enhancement Shaman and the group calls that they need cooldowns, so you've got something that you can use that's just going to help top people off. Not quite as quick as something like Vampiric Embrace, if I'm honest, unless you're a Resto Shaman and you've got all that spell power, but it's still really, really nice in a pinch. And the same goes for Ancestral Guidance. Ancestral Guidance is a level 75 talent, and it's absolutely amazing for every spec of Shaman, because when you deal direct damage or healing for the next 10 seconds, 40% of the damage or 60% of the healing is copied as healing on up to 3 nearby injured party or raid members. So if you're healing, 60% of that is then going to be redistributed across 3 people. You can carry on just pumping into the boss with cooldowns and just nuking hard as, let's say, an Ellie Shaman and pop this, and you'll see the difference. Again, these are really strong cooldowns that will just be factored into organisation around raid bosses. And the last one's not a raid cooldown, don't get me wrong, and I'm going to do a full video on it, but I just want to mention Symbiosis and a couple of places where it can be really strong. So all specs of Druid are going to get Symbiosis, which it only lasts for this one expansion, because I don't think they could ever quite get it balanced right. But how Symbiosis works is you put it on a raid member, and depending on what class and spec you put it on, you'll give them an ability and you'll take an ability from them. That's not to say they lose the ability, you still keep all your normal abilities, but you'll get an extra one. Now, this is normally much stronger for the druid who's receiving the buff than the person that is actually getting one, but it can still be pretty nice if you're putting it on a tank, for example. If you was to put it on a brewmaster, you're going to give them a monk version of survival instincts. So it's another 25% damage reduction cooldown. If you put it on a hunter, they're going to get dash. If you put it on a rogue, they get growl. So actually your rogue can do some pretty funky things with kiting. And a really good one, actually, is putting it on a warrior so they get their own stampeding roar, but it's called stampeding shout. But the really good ones are for the druid itself. So as a druid doing it on a death knight and your balance, you're going to be able to get anti-magic shell. If you're restoration and you put it on a mage, you're going to get ice block. If you're feral and you put it on a paladin, you're going to get divine shield. So there's so many ways you can use your druid and make sure that they use their symbiosis correctly to be able to cheese certain mechanics. And trust me, it will be mega useful, and you're going to want to make sure that each spec of druid that's in the raid has actually got their symbiosis on the correct class and spec. But anyway, that about covers it. There will be some smaller little healing cooldowns that I've left out. I just wanted to cover the real big ones that you actually really need to know about. If you enjoyed the video, as always, be sure to like and subscribe. Check out Rested XP in the pinned comment in the description to get a guide for the fastest way to level in any version of World of Warcraft. Of course, it's an affiliate link, so any guides bought go towards supporting the channel, so thanks in advance for that. Consider joining as a member. Why not? That show extra support if you want to join as a member. The podcast will be coming back very soon, probably in the next week or two. And I think that's about me done, so I'll see you on the next one.